But our first collaborative conversation, we had 15 of us and we met and we did a silent tea ceremony. So it was an 1 hour silent tea. And then afterwards, we talked about the power of kind of whole communication. How does our body language, the energy that we bring, kind of our past and our histories and generational impacts, how do we bring that into conversation? And it was a deeply, I think Mara, you were with us, it was a deeply powerful experience and just a connection of just some very, I would say it was like high power, high charging leaders who were able to actually hold space together to just be. And it was just extremely powerful. And so that came out of, I was sharing an experience that I had with my friend Heather, that we had gone to tea together. And I think we said 5 words total. And I felt like my friendship with her was stronger than it had ever been. And just like really that whole thing to be able to pay that forward. So that was our first one. And so this one came out of the fact that probably with almost every single one of you, we have talked about foresight. And we realized that, again, the power of collaboration is every person's like, that's so interesting, da, 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 da. And we're like, why don't we all come together and just have a chat and introduce you to some friends of ours who were our first entree into this space. But strategic foresight and the kind of this conversation, I lovingly say it was my COVID hobby. So some people learned how to make sourdough bread and do different kinds of things. I decided to lean in on the concept of horizon scanning, implication wheels, scenario planning. Jenny first, and then she'll kind of chat here in a second. She first talked about strategic foresight at the end of 2019. And to me, I was like, I don't really know what you're talking about. This seems like way woo-woo, like way out here, and I just don't really get it. And then COVID happened, and I started realizing that there was people who not predicting, because what we'll talk about here is we are not able to predict the future by no means, but there's things out there on these, like if we did our scanning exercises, that this wasn't a surprise to some people. And I was like, there are certain things that we can start to learn. And what I love about foresight is that there actually are repeatable tools and actions that you can do. And so that fit into my type A analytical structure process brain. And I jumped right in and I did my first training in June of 2020 and became certified in December of 2020. So it was a really exciting time to actually go super deep into this concept where most people felt that kind of fear and, you know, the chaos of what was happening during that time. I was like, there's ways that we can actually feel a bit more in control in times like that. So anyway, we were excited to be able to just kind of pull some people together. And since you've all shown some interest, we wanted just to spend an hour and introduce you to the world that gets Jenny and I so passionate.
Yeah, and because I want to spend the majority of our time with Frank and Yvette, and I'll introduce them in a minute, but this makes me so happy. I mean, one thing, and my husband says, oh man, I hear this all the time, but my favorite thing in the world is to be in a room with incredibly smart people talking about things that matter. And this right here, I mean, just looking at every single person on this call, coming together to do amazing things, I think is just, this is like my favorite thing in the whole universe. So thank you so much for being here. As Keith mentioned, I got officially introduced to the world of foresight in 2019, November of 2019, which Housen and I, yes, met in Portland. He's amazing. And yes, I swear, in such a small world. But one of the very first things that we did, so it was a 3-day session that I did, the foundations program, which we are doing one I just in full openness of doing another. Frank and Yvette are putting together one of these 3-day sessions in LA in October. So if there's anything that you guys are interested in, please, we're going to introduce you to them and direct access to these guys. But we did a training up in Portland. And one of the very first things that you do is write on a piece of paper of, there's got to be a better way to blank. And so you write in of whatever this is, there's got to be a better way to XYZ. You know, and I always thought that I was the only one that thought, I mean, I dream in possibilities. I think most people, I'm friends with most people on this call of, you know, I'm like, there's gotta be a better way. Why are we talking about? And I thought I was maybe a little different, one of the only ones to think this way. And it is not the case. There's a whole world out here. The people that we have met in this space, I will just say, is unbelievable. So the access to the people, the amazing, I mean, Kate and I were in Mexico on a retreat with the founder of Greenpeace earlier this summer. I mean, the people in the world of opening up. So one, just thank you, Frank and Yvette, for what this is. that we wanted to introduce you guys. I will give you a little tiny warning. I love the phrase of when you know better, you do better. Well, when you open your mind to this way of thinking, you can't unknow it. So it's just a different way of thinking about the world, a different implications. It's a different way of just seeing different perspectives, and it's so fun. So selfishly, we are on a mission with at TFSX, where Frank and Yvette work and started. We're on a mission to democratize the future and to get people access to the future in doing this type of work. Katie and I are very much of wanting to create everyday futurists. Sometimes I'm in this world and I feel, I will just say, a little imposter syndrome of some of the most incredible, smart people I've ever been around. I'm feeling more comfortable in the room of being an everyday futurist. We bring this into the work that we do every single day, and we want to bring that to you guys. So today I want to introduce you to, and after this, I mean, we could spend an entire day entire 3 days doing this, but if there's any sort of one, I would love also in the chat of who you guys are, if you at least want to start, because I want people to know who they are, of like who you are, company you work with, where in the world you are, because I know we've got people from different places. So one, you can use the chat, any sort of questions that you have, we will keep going. So this is not an end all be all conversation here, at least starting it. But Frank and Yvette run the Future School, and I think it's now TFSX. I don't know what that stands for, the Future School X. They'll tell us in a minute. They think they just rebranded, but they are incredible, world-renowned futurists. They were just in Brazil. They were just in Dubai, working with incredible, amazing, working at Disney, working with some of the largest companies in the world. And we are so honored to call them our friends of now doing this. Like we said, they're in Florida. I know that you were going to do a little bit more intro, so I will hand it over to Frank and Yvette to share with you guys about this world that's in here. So any questions, put it over in the chat. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny and Katie. Now I know when people say, wow, your energy, it's infectious. I can see it in Jenny and Katie. So I'm on the flip side of that, because usually people are like, okay, we get it. You love the future. We totally get it. We totally get it. But we do. And we're so honored to be with you all for the next little bit. I know some of you have submitted your questions ahead of time. We are going to try to sprinkle responses to those as we go along. But as Jenny said, any additional questions that you have, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We're going to have you contribute as well in the chat in a minute or two, some questions. But just by way of introduction, my name is Yvette Montero Salvatico, and along with Frank Spencer, we co-founded this firm we call TFSX now. It's gone through a couple of different name changes, but the essence and the DNA is still the same. Our mission is really to democratize the field of foresight. My background, I worked for 13 years for the Walt Disney Company in finance and in strategy, and then I was tapped to lead a new division focused specifically on the future of work. I went to a few conferences, as one does when we want to learn about a new field you'd never heard about. And at one of those conferences, I happened to share an airport van with this guy. And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history.
You did, except it's the word absconded. You stole my van. You stole my van.
I don't know what you're talking about. All I know is I got off the plane in Vancouver, hopped in a van, and next thing I know, some weirdo with a sci-fi shirt was hopping in after me.
It's a futures conference, of course. They gotta have a sci-fi shirt. So I came straight from Comic-Con. I think that's what people think the foresight field is all about, but we'll get into that a little bit today, because if you've never heard of futures and foresight, it does sort of sound, if it's something you're not familiar with, it makes a lot of sense. It sounds sort of woo-woo and out there, as Jenny and Katie were saying, but it's a 100-year-old field, and a lot of people still don't know about it because I think of the way that our systems sort of run today. But more and more people than ever before know about it now because they know of the way our systems run today and they aren't working. So that's why foresight is so powerful.
Yeah. And so in terms of our firm, just to give a little bit of context here, we do a lot of training and we certify foresight professionals as well. well. But there is a whole arm of our organization from whence we started that does consulting engagements with small and large organizations across the world. And we're happy to share some of those case studies if it's helpful. But essentially, our goal is to unlock this innate capability that lies within all of us. And we do that and want to do that because we believe that the world will be a better place if more people felt empowered and felt that they had agency to create better futures. And that's what Foresight really does. It allows us to think differently about our own futures as individuals, as professionals, for our communities, for our families, but also our organizations, our institutions, the environment. It's critical that we empower ourselves and our colleagues and our children to be able to think like futurists. So in terms of our values and our beliefs, again, we're not going to belabor the point, but I think it's helpful to know that you're not going to hear a ton of, technology trend spewing from us. We do track trends in technology, but we know that the future is not about technology. The future is about people.
I'm always afraid lightning is going to strike you when you say that.
Like the Wi-Fi,
It's not about technology.
the Wi-Fi gods will not like that we were saying that, and we'll lose our Zoom connection immediately.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
This obviously includes technology, but it's not about technology.
Yeah.
It's about people.
Yeah, we have to keep people in the center of our conversations about the future and ensure that those conversations don't just include the dominant narratives, but those from marginalized voices as well. You can see that we believe everyone can and should think like a futurist, and that we have an ethical obligation to act with a long-term perspective. So these are just some of the ways that, we shape the work that we do and the decisions we make as a firm. We have had the privilege, really honestly, of working across the globe. Before the pandemic, the large portion of our client work was outside the United States. That has shifted over time, but you can see that through our online sessions, our online collaborations, as well as our in-person consulting work, we've had an opportunity to work with so many different types of organizations and institutions and individuals. That's what's so great, is that no two people will have the same past or the same present. The one time space we can co-create in is the future. And so that's why we love what we do. So that's just a little bit about us. We're based out of Florida for the most part. We've got Emily on our team is joining us from Idaho, and she's helping us with the chat as well today, providing us links. But yeah, we collaborate with folks across the globe to do the work that we do.
Yeah, I'm glad that you showed the, these slides are just sort of for you all to join in the conversation and, thought starters, right? But something that wasn't on the slide, because you shared the futures about people, it includes technology and economics and demographics and you name it, on and on and on, right? But it's about people. And one of my favorite philosophers, Benita Roy, she has this quote, and she says, through the work that I've done in philosophy, really, I've come to realize that I can fall in love with the future and dream myself awake, which is just such a beautiful phrase. And I was reminded of it when I saw Dawn introducing herself, Dawn Reese on here, talking about being at the wooden floor and helping to break generational poverty and through dance and access to higher education. And it's one of the most important things, because Foresight is definitely a strategy, an innovation, a planning methodology. But we know, and I was just reading something from our friend Sohail Inyatella this morning. He said, recently I was working with a data company, and we know how important data is. And he said, and so this company said to him, it's all about data. And he said, and then for the next 5 minutes, they went on to tell the story of their company and of their founder and blah, 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 and all that. And he said, that's really interesting. You spent the last 5 minutes
telling us the story.
First second telling me data was the most important thing, and the last 5 minutes telling me stories. And we know that stories are what really move people. So that's not to say that foresight doesn't include data, because it most certainly does. But we know what really moves people is stories, and this idea of like, I learned to fall in love with the future and dream myself awake. We're changing hearts and minds. And that's what changes strategy. That's what changes innovation. That's what changes organizational development really at its core. And so that's why foresight is so powerful, because it is both a quant and a qual approach to looking at what organizational development models means, new ways of thinking and new value props, right?
Yep. So we are going to take you through just a few high level slides. This field has been around for over 100 years. You can get your master's degree. Oh, wait, you have your master's degree in strategic force. Way to
Oh,
go.
look at you, Housen.
Yeah, Alison does too.
Nice,
And
nice.
so we have a couple of MSFs or MFAs on here or something. So yeah, I don't know about Housen.
Giving you some.
I don't know about Housen, but like it just has to be mentioned. It's in our bylaws that it has to be mentioned because it makes my mom super proud. But no, there really is, like Yvette said, the point of that is that there's studies in this. There's, deep philosophy around foresight. But the important thing is to make it practical. And how do we incorporate in our life? Somebody was saying that the WTF book, written by the former foresight head of MasterCard, was really important because it's applicable to our own lives. And I think that's one of the most important things.
Yeah. So my point is, obviously, we're only going to scratch the surface in the time that we have together, but we always love, and I'm so excited to have Katie and Jenny, personally invite all of you, because one of the greatest joys as a foresight professional or as a futurist is to be the person that introduces someone else to this field. And we talk about, like, in one of my favorite movies is Jurassic Park, and he talks about like wanting to be there when the dinosaurs hatch so that they can imprint on him or he can imprint on them. It's very similar. Like, whoever exposes you to this field, you connect with them. And it's such a joy for us to be with all of you and be a small part of, for many of you, what I think is your initiation into this field. So we can't make promises that we're going to give you a master's degree in 40 minutes, but we are going to go over some of the broad introductory content. We are keeping your questions in mind. And we will leave time at the end for some active Q&A, because I'm sure more questions will pop in your brain. You can certainly drop them in the chat. And if it makes sense, we'll pause there to answer them, or we can save them to the end. But before we start with that introductory material, I have a question for them.
Interesting.
I have a question for everyone here. And my question is this: what major constraints are you facing right now? Whether that's inside your organization, outside your organization, outside your life, inside your life, your system, however you want to define it. Drop them in the chat if you don't mind, or feel free to unmute. What are some of the major constraints you're facing right now? Because I know we have some.
Lack of willingness to collaborate. That's huge. And I think there's, this just the environment we're in, sort of just doesn't help with that a lot, does it?
Yes. Whitney, did you have a one that you wanted to share?
Yeah.
Capacity, time, always time shows up all the time when we ask that question.
Yes, time and money.
Yeah.
Transitioning decades old thinking, of course.
I love this idea of it's like overload challenges efficiencies, and there's a whole thing there. It's like there's we could stay on that for a while.
Yeah, we could thumb up all of these. Time and capacity, resources, reluctance to change, overload, economic volatility, apprehension and giving. Yeah. So this sort of like scarcity,
change, of course,
mindset. Yes. All of those things.
Tim, systems. I think you and I could probably get along really. Just systems.
Just systems. All of them. Every single one. Yeah. I mean, again, the last few years, we have gotten even more acquainted with the idea of constraints and obstacles. It wasn't that long ago where, the world literally shut down. But even after that fact, I mean, again, it is every day that we're facing many of these challenges. So let me ask you a follow-up question to that. What if, from my days at Disney, I was able to, I don't want to say I stole because that's not appropriate, but basically gave me as a going away gift a magic wand. Okay.
And a bottle of fairy dust.
I need the pixie fairy sound here in my soundboard. I missed out on that. Let's say I can wave that magic wand and I'm going to remove all of those constraints. You now have unlimited time, unlimited resources. There's no bureaucracy. The systems are working well. There's no fear of change. There's less volatility, less scarcity. There's more of a growth mindset. If that were the case, and you could direct what is done, what would you do?
You can drop that in the chat as well, if you can imagine such.
Yeah. Generally, this is a harder question for us to answer. At least that's been our experience when we've asked
The first thing that people, there's always somebody, and no, you know, blame here, whatever. But because I understand, but there's always somebody that says like, but we do have constraints.
Yeah.
Don't ask me a stupid question.
Yeah,
It's like the question was, if there were no constraints, imagine for a moment.
I mean, when we do this across the globe, whether it's online or in person, whether it's a room of 30 or 300, you know, that first question, what are the constraints? You can feel the energy in the room just go up. I mean, people are ready to tell you about their 99 problems. They are excited to tell you. But when you ask this question, a lot of times there's, you know, a palatable silence that falls. And that's in part because I don't know that we're necessarily geared to think in this idea of like, there's no constraints, partly because, you know, there are constraints. I get it. I totally get it. But here's the thing. How many of you use to-do lists? Like, you know, I know Katie does because she's my A-type gal, right? So I create to-do lists, you know. You don't have to raise your hand, but unless you want to, but how many of you have completed a task? Let's say it wasn't on your to-do list. You completed it. You added it to your to-do list just to cross it off. Anyone want to acknowledge? Jason says, yes. Okay. All right. It's sick. That's really sick, actually. When you
Don't encourage her. Don't encourage her.
No. So here's the deal. We're all, you know, very focused on efficiency, and we're all, you know, getting things done. We're moving our organizations forward, our communities forward. And, you know, we put out fires, and there's an adrenaline rush that comes from checking something off the list, from getting something accomplished, from overcoming an obstacle. And that's all well and good, and
reward too, right? Because that's how
we're are rewarding us for that. But if we don't know, or if our leadership doesn't know, or if our community leaders, our elected officials, our teams do not know the answer to this second question, then how do we know that what's on our to-do list is even the right things? How do we know we're putting out even the right fires? And so this is a really fundamental concept in foresight that is so critical that we all sort of entertain and think about before we move forward and talk about more of the technical things, is that foresight, it's not about the future. It's about the present, because how we think about the future, typically unconsciously, impacts the decisions we're making in the present.
I mean, this statement is so powerful because I know that many of you are probably thinking, if you're not familiar with the field of foresight, that, you know, how do you guys go about predicting and, you know, really thinking about, you know, an accurate outcome to the future. But futures thinking really isn't dealing with predicting. It's dealing with the idea that we are all thinking that the future is going to turn out one way or another. It's mostly unconscious. And we don't realize it, but that is directing the actions we take today, or the systems we think are normal, or this one came down from heaven, you know, and this is the way things are. This is how reality works, because we think that's how things are to go, how things will turn out. And so it's mostly not conscious, it's subconscious or unconscious that we have this official path to the future, and that's dictating what we think we should measure and the way systems should be formed and the models that we should use and how things should unfold and where we should invest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to check whether we understand all the multiple possible futures that could unfold. And are we ready for them? And even more importantly, are we aiming for futures that aren't necessarily just on that linear path, but something that will get us to a place of transformation, something better? There has to be a better way.
Yeah.
Right.
So foresight in its core form allows us to elevate these conversations about the future from unconscious or subconscious to conscious, so that it actually actively informs the decisions we're making today, because we're creating the future every day, right? With the actions we take. And so you could think of foresight as a set of tools to be able to do that. We're going to go through a little bit about like where foresight is used and all of that, but we just wanted to share briefly. We've had, again, just the honor to contribute to publications across the world over the last decade plus. And we just wanted to highlight this, this magazine, the Rotman Management magazine that we contributed to. The theme was all about value creation. And we were excited to be asked to contribute to this themed publication, because really we all should be worried about and concerned about value creation, whether that's for our organization, for our community, for our society as a whole. How do we create and generate value? And the fact is that what got us here isn't going to get us into the future with value creation. We have to recognize that we're in a different environment. Some call this environment the post-normal world. And so again, whether you call it post-normal or other terms, look, we all have to recognize that what we thought of as normal has evaporated. We're sort of an in-between stage. We're not going back to normal. Some might define it as complex and chaotic and contradictory, but it's also open source and collaborative. And the fact that we can all gather today here together is an example of the post-normal world. And so it's a mixed bag, surely, and it allows us to think transformationally. So we wanted to talk about how foresight can enable us to create value in new ways from new sources in a transformational way by leveraging this post-normal environment. Some might call it VUCA.
Yeah, I'm sure that everybody on this call is familiar with this VUCA acronym. It's been around for a while. It's not just in the field of foresight. It's used all over the place, just generally in organizations, because they're really concerned about the growing volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it sounds very, very scary.
Yeah. Whoever framed, oh wait, it was the US military. Yeah. Who framed this acronym? That makes sense. It's all very scary.
Yeah, because when they were going into Afghanistan, I believe,
they've never seen anything like it.
The VUCA environment sort of became the norm, and they coined that, acronym. And now, like I said, you've got leaders going into their jobs on Monday morning, or just all of us going into our work weeks or our lives saying like, wow, I live in a really volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, and I wish that I could manage it again. And that's what foresight does, is not necessarily helps us to put it back in a box, because there's no putting the genie back in a box, but really, how do we flow with a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world for prosperity, for abundance, for opportunity? Because in reality, that's the way the world always was. How do we shift our mindset so that we can see success and measure differently, have new value props and value creation in a VUCA world? Yeah.
Yeah. And if you love acronyms, like Mark said, there's new ones coming out every day. Banny. Frank loves the ALIVE acronym that he coined. It's a little bit more of a positive spin on the environment that's unfolding. But whether you believe in Banny, VUCA, ALIVE, or whatever,
tuna, that's another
there's a tuna. I think you wrote a whole article about all the different alphabet soup.
It's in the ALIVE ebook. It starts off talking about VUCA, Banny, but Emily just dropped it. So if you want to see the ALIVE acronym, there you go.
Yeah. So regardless of what acronym you sort of align with, the truth is that we need different approaches, tools, methods, and even mindsets to be successful in our post-normal environment. And foresight, we believe, is the key here. It leverages not just research and data, but also creativity and intuition. It allows us to mine the external environment for those signals of change that are happening all around us, make sense of them, and create maps of potential futures so that we can make better decisions in the present. So let's talk a little bit about what foresight is, where it's used, how it's applied, and then we'll, open it up to any additional conversations and questions that we want to have, because we definitely want to have a collaborative conversation with you. So we created this one pager in response to the fact that attention spans aren't what they used to be. And we used to have a 30-page presentation, but now it's all one page, one slide.
It needs to be a TikTok or a reel.
Yeah.
Now.
That's the next thing. That's it.
So
So let's just walk through. So what is strategic foresight?
who knows?
You can think of it as giving us a framework to identify those emerging trends and issues. Many of you in your questions were asking us, what is the future of education? What is the future of space law? I love that question.
Oh, that's good.
And so foresight futurists do spend a fair amount of time looking at the trends and emerging issues, but that's just the beginning, because ultimately trends, they represent the present. Right? Because we can see them, we can identify them, right? So that's just the starting point. So we do identify trends and issues and the value shifts that preceded them, but we use that information to map out possible futures. Comes from where we stand today, there's an unlimited number of futures that can unfold. These maps then help us to make better decisions in the present, whether that is informing our current strategy, developing breakthrough innovations, or even shepherding transformative change. Foresight is a change mechanism in and of itself. And people tend to fear the future because they fear change. And so we need to change that narrative. We need to help people feel empowered, unlock this ability that they have inside of them to be able to see what's emerging, make better decisions, and move us all into better futures. So that's what foresight is. Let's talk about where we might utilize foresight, where we see it utilized across sectors and industries.
Yeah, I mean, everywhere. And as a matter of fact, in just a couple of days, we have a webinar coming up.
Yeah, a free webinar. I think Emily's set to drop it in the chat. This is our Global Foresight Advisory Council. We host a webinar with them once a quarter, just about. And our next one is going to be the federal. Oh, I think someone's off of mute. So we're going to be hosting one focused on the group that's attempting to add foresight to the U.S. government.
Yeah, and they're made up of people from the space industry and from the governmental industries, institutions and stuff. So, yeah, that'll be really exciting.
But there are governments across the world that already have foresight.
Totally.
The government of Spain just implemented it across the UAE.
Yeah.
Really across Europe, across Asia. Singapore is a very famous case study as well.
Yeah, and all the time, more and more growing. So, but you see it in nonprofits. I mean, how many nonprofits have we worked with
many.
Just alone over the years? And we're not, alone in that at all. The UN, of course, has foresight plastered almost in every division, and they have divisions dedicated just to foresight. And you saw in the map, just alone our company, the corporates that we've worked with across the world, from large to small, and there's others that do tons of corporate work as well. Hassan's on here, and he can tell you all about working with cities with SGR.
Yeah,
and
I would just say that in corporates, sometimes the individuals are called futurists or foresight professionals, and sometimes it's more embedded, whether it's in the HR function, the strategy function, consumer insights, competitive intelligence. All of those professionals and groups also.
I mean, a good example of that is, we did 3 years of work embedding foresight with General Mills.
Yep.
And they don't really talk about a foresight function anymore. They've embedded it more in corporate insight. Whereas at McDonald's, our friend Joanna Lepore is the head of foresight, global foresight for McDonald's. So they sort of promote it more as foresight. And that's another point too, is like McDonald's, General Mills, Disney, Lego. This 10 years ago was not happening.
Yeah.
And now people are appointing, chief foresight officers and, heads of foresight and global foresight leaders. So.
Yeah. So within those industries and sectors across the world, foresight is used. And when is it used? What is it used to fuel? We talk about foresight fueling strategy. Probably the most famous historical example is Shell Oil. They were one of the first to leverage foresight scenarios to help inform their strategic planning. But the strategy function is probably one of the most common places you'll see foresight leveraged, but it's also extremely powerful in creating disruptive innovations, in shepherding change, both within an organization and across society. And then, as was mentioned at the start of the webinar, for personal development. So all the tools that are applicable at this institution and organizational level can be applied to you, to your children, to your family members, to help map their own personal development, whether that's career or otherwise. Foresight is a really powerful way to do that. How is it used? There's a multitude of frameworks within Strategic Foresight. We created the Natural Foresight framework, and it's called that because we believe this is a natural part of everyday life that we should be leveraging, and our framework is based off of the idea of complex adaptive systems and how nature works intuitively and naturally. So it has 4 facets, and there's a host of tools, but the point here is that Foresight does give us a phenomenal toolkit with repeatable processes that allow us to bring others along. So yes, it's a mindset. Yes, it's a philosophy and a field, but it's also a set of tools. And those are really, really powerful tools. And then ultimately, why do we need foresight? Well, again, we're in a post-normal environment. It's not enough to just create incremental innovations or base our plans on past experience and extrapolate that forward. We know we have to be adaptive, we have to be resilient, and we must be transformative. And foresight allows us to do that. One last slide and concept here before we open it up to all of you to dive into more detail on any of these concepts or anything else that you want to ask about is this idea that the future exists across a spectrum. And that's why we talk about not predicting the future, but mapping it.
Yes. I forgot the good old, and how can I forget? Because push and pull, I mean, it's so
It's a core.
I forgot it was in here though.
Yeah.
But last but not least, let's just think about this for a minute, and then we can sort of dive into discussion and questions. You talked about this being embedded, in like consumer insights and business intelligence and things that already exist, and it makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of times people hear that part and they say, oh, I know about trend scouting or ethnographics or whatever the case might be. And I know about all of these trends that are coming in, they're pushing us, they're pushing us, whether we want to be pushed or not to the future. And so this makes a lot of sense from that perspective, because you're saying I need to get ready for what future's unfolding and be able to say, should I take advantage of these trends? How do I avoid this, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's the push end of the future.
Yeah, we all know it very well in many ways. And then again, we don't.
Yeah.
But there's this other that I would say we almost are completely unfamiliar with. Another one of my favorite philosophers, Sophie Strand, who I get to interview October 1st, and I can't wait. She says that all living things transform, which is interesting because a lot of our organizations avoid transformation like the plague. But if all living things transform and some things aren't transforming, I'll let you do the rest of the math there. And this pull of the future is really about that transformation. It's about what futures do we want to see unfold, what's trying to emerge, what are our aspirations, what are the goals that we're aiming for, how do we pull ourselves into those futures and in turn pull the future into our todays. As we said, the way we think about the future directly impacts the actions we take today. We often don't do anything about this in the future. Organizations don't have a function for this. It's not in their processes and their models. But this is a very important part of the future spectrum. Yes, the push is an important end, but the pull is equally, if not even maybe in this time, more important. And so this is something that is really important to us here at TFSX, and I know is to most futurists around the world. How do we think about putting a transformation, yes, and adaptation and resilience, those are all natural processes, into the work that we do so that we are future empowered in our organizations and in our leadership and our own lives. Yeah.
So we started our conversation today with those 2 questions, the obstacles, you could think of that as the push of the future, and what future would you would create or direct if you didn't have those obstacles. That's the pull of the future. As Frank said, the future exists across the spectrum. And from our decades of work in this field, we know that understanding the full spectrum, migrating organizations, avoiding threats, taking advantage of opportunities, but also acknowledging what aspirations we have, what future we want to create is critical. We're all, again, creating the future every day with the decisions we make, the actions we take. Foresight allows us to do that more collaboratively, more participatorily, and with our aspirations in mind to hopefully pull that more desired future to the present. And so as futurists, we leverage the full spectrum of the future, and that's how we do our work. So that's a little bit, a little bit of a taster into what foresight is.
Frank, I want to say
yes.
just really quick, one of the things that we love, I mean, I have like so many notes on here, so I'm going to pause for everyone else here, but one thing that we talk a lot about is agency, and just for like two things of like realizing that we have our agency, our own agency. And like, I love this pull of the future. And can you just talk for just a second of, your company was called before Kedge, and anyone who's not a sailor, I guess I didn't really realize, but it just really helped me in this because the push of the future and the pull, but Kedge of what that is, and that we all have so much agency over where we want to go, of just that little bit.
Yeah, we just sailed right past that.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, so our parent company is named Kedge, and it's not an acronym. A Kedge is a smaller anchor on a sailing vessel. We all know what the large anchor does. It keeps us right where we are. And we always joke that maybe that would have been a better name for our firm because people tend to like to stay where they are. But no, that's not what we called ourselves. We called ourselves Kedge. That's still our parent and legal entity. But a Kedge is a smaller anchor on a sailing vessel. And when there was no wind at sea, and they were sort of stuck, it was either go stir crazy or deploy the Kedge. And the way that would work is they would take that Kedge attached to a super long rope, and they would identify the newer sailors. So maybe Emily, I don't know. I don't want to point her out, but maybe Emily's in the rowboat. No, she's good. She's good. They drop them in the rowboat and they head in the direction they all wanted to head. And they drop the Kedge when they reach the end of the rope. And those remaining on the larger vessel would then pull themselves. And so the Kedge really represents that pull the future that we want to pull ourselves to. But the secret here is not just that you can pull yourself to desired futures, but rather that you can pull that future to today. You can manifest that future even sooner by leveraging the tools, methods, and mindsets of foresight, and acknowledging both the push and the pull. So that's where sort of kedging the future fits in. So thank you for
that's awesome.
Acknowledging that, Jenny. I love that story as well. So Mark had asked, who was it that said all living things transform?
So Sophie Strand. She is a poet, storyteller, philosopher, writer. She's all around amazing. And we'll actually be having a conversation on October 1st. So stand by but you can look her up on YouTube. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of videos of Sophie, and she's written books. And
so we can open it up. Katie, where do you want to go next in terms of
then there's a question in here, and then I have some questions that people sent over on Friday, but even just talking about that with the all living things transform, and I'm not going to remember, but we spent 3 nights, I think 4 days up in the Redwoods with Frank and Yvette and future leader or futurists from around the world doing trainings there. And really, and more, I bring that up of the beauty and the power that comes from also learning some of these types of tools. And it makes me think of Knight's on here. He's got his camera off, but Karen Leadership. Knight does leadership training. I went backpacking in Olympic National Park with Knight and his group, and being able to learn in nature and just the way and the realizing that we're all connected, because it's all, again, living systems and living things, and that we've created as people, as humans, this complexity within our systems, but there's so much to be able to learn from the systems that have existed in the world long before we walked the earth.
Before us.
And there is something extremely powerful. So there is a different training that Frank and Yvette do that's outside of the original one that they'll be doing in October. But that was it. There was so much profound beauty that came out of that whole experience, and seeing the way that trees interact with each other, and just all of those different kinds of lessons that we can learn from the past and the future and interactions with it. So I just wanted to point out a very powerful experience that I had with Frank and Yvette, and again with Knight and his leadership programs that he does out on big adventures as well, and the types of things that you can lead from that. And so it just weren't.
I remember you saying that you went on the trip, and you posted pictures from that as well too, because I think it was this was the snowy trip.
Next Gen Collaborative, which I'll give this tonight as well. That was my takeaway from that is that I was determined to launch Next Gen Collaborative.
Oh, that's
Oh,
awesome.
wow.
That's
Program
awesome.
in Olympic
That's
National Park. So
amazing.
It's
I
amazing.
have to thank him while he's on
Nature is
here.
anticipatory. Nature is anticipatory, and we are nature. So I think a lot of times just reminding ourselves that, again, this is an innate capability that we have. We've tried to drill it out of ourselves
I love
by
that you guys
becoming
brought
more
this up.
mechanistic.
I didn't expect to see that brought up, but I love that you brought it up, because I do think there's something powerful about that. Before we say, like, this sounds like I don't really quite get this or whatever, it doesn't sound like something that will work. This is how the rest of the cosmos works. Robert Rosen, should have won a Nobel Prize, but at the time people thought his work was really bizarre. Now, looking back, everybody says he should have won 3 Nobel Prizes, and his work was all on the anticipation of living systems, and all living things are anticipatory. How do we employ imaginal anticipation as a normal part of organizational development? It should be, because it's natural, and not write that off as something because we're only living in systems that don't employ that kind of way of thinking. So this is the power of foresight. To be future empowered is such a powerful thing. And as Jenny and Katie were saying when we first started, really everyday future is, how do we put this in our strategy work, in our innovation work, in our consumer insights work, in our organizational development work. And I can tell you, having done this work for 20 plus years, is such a powerful thing to do.
And in our communities, I think so many of you are community leaders, and you have such a unique opportunity that many of you are sort of geographically close to each other and maybe share the same communities, is that, you can think of this as a movement from this point on, and educating yourself. There's a lot of free resources out there on foresight and futures thinking. And the more we can help our electorate and our citizens and our community members feel comfortable and feel like they have agency in creating the future, because this is a privileged conversation, right? A lot of people, sadly, across the world do not feel that they have agency to create a better future. They are literally just trying to survive the present. And so I think we bear a responsibility, if we have the opportunity to have space to have these conversations, that we not only empower ourselves, but those around us.
Well, we always say we have a moral obligation to the future, and that we often write that off. So that's, all of us gathered here on this call today, we have a moral obligation in the future, joining into that moral obligation. And that's what Next Gen Collaborative is trying to do at the core of what they're doing. It's like, we've got this responsibility to the future. It's powerful.
I think there's a couple of questions in here, but one, even just on that topic, there was a question Housen had passed along, and I think, Jenny, maybe each of us, and even Housen, if you want to answer kind of the question for yourself as well. But what are some everyday habits, thoughts, or actions that we can intentionally practice to cultivate foresight in our own lives? And that's, again, as Jenny said, that we're passionate about just being able to think differently in this mindset shift. And so, like, that concept of everyday futurists. And so for me, even, it is, if I am reading things or hearing about different kinds of things, again, that would be part of that horizon scanning. But if you even just think you're reading, you're listening to a podcast, you're watching the news, you're something, pick one thing and say, what if it went this way? And what if it went this way? So, like, just starting to use, that's more implications. If this became the truth, if this was the answer, how would that impact my life, my business, my whatever? Or if this became the truth. So even if we took whatever, let's not to start getting us down the political side, but if this party won, or if this
I knew
party
she was
won,
going there. I knew she was going there.
It could be whatever. If this light turned green or it turned red. I mean, it could be as simple as that. How do we think that it would impact our lives? And so, starting even with those small things, if I turned right versus left, what would end up happening for me today? And then actually just saying, what would be potential ripple effect of that one decision or that one thing becoming the truth? And so the thing about implication wheels is, if this becomes the reality, then it could be, there could be a positive or a negative impact. And then it just can keep spidering out. But if every day we're taking, or we're listening, we're thinking about something, it is like a choose your own adventure book. That's exactly it, Kristen.
I loved those.
And starting to do that at the simplest levels. If, like, we make this one decision, automatically our answers within businesses, we say resistance of change or fear of change was one of the biggest things. And going back to what Frank and Yvette asked in the very beginning, if we stopped and said, if we decided to take that leap of faith, what is the potential that could happen? Or if we didn't do it, what is the potential that could happen? And just spend 5 minutes going down each one of those. That's 10 minutes out of your day. And if you just start doing that on a regular basis, you start thinking differently. Obviously, then there's huge amount of tools in your toolbox to be able to do this at a much macro level. But that is even just the power of it being an everyday type of thing. When we start thinking and we start thinking of that power of possibilities. And that's, again, like as Jenny says, she dreams in possibilities. It's just that way of being curious about potential futures that are out there. And I love that reminder that it's not the future, it's futures with the S, because there's unlimited possibilities of what our futures could be. And so that's just that. When I saw your question, and that was what I thought about. That's something that I challenge myself to do every day. You can get stuck in your rut and stuck in your hamster wheel of things, but you have to intentionally say, but what if? What if, what if, what if, what if, what if? And so again, doing it, if you commit to 10 minutes every day of allowing yourself to go down 2 different scenarios on whatever you experience that day, it just starts becoming more and more of your everyday life, stuff like that. So that's just, again, of wanting to leave people with a small tangible action that they can do today on that. So
Yeah.
Love that.
I think we had a couple different questions. So here's a question. If a futurist mindset can be employed as an organizational imperative, how can you move it forward in an organization that is traditionally moved slow? So how do you integrate these kinds of mindsets within a traditional kind of more legacy?
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of different ways. I mean, I think what's great about legacy organizations is that they care about their legacy. And a lot of times, if you look to the past, they have changed over time. It just maybe isn't as evident now. So if they're still around after however many years, they've done something right. What is that core DNA, and how does it need to continue to transform to be relevant going forward? And so I always say that we want to embed this in existing processes. If you add to your to-do list, if you make this a bright, shiny object, it's not going to take, it's not going to continue. So is there already a strategic planning process? Embed foresight in that. Is there already, executive development in place? Is there already change processes in place? There are ways to include foresight tools and methods in all of these existing. Think of it as your operating system, not an app. Foresight should run in the background of everything that you do every single day. And so finding ways or processes that exist and empowering them with foresight is the best way, I think, when you have a more, traditional organization, which no organization raises their hand to want to change. It's sort of like against their DNA usually. But that's what I would suggest is
Talent
find those.
development,
Talent is a great way.
Or corporate education.
Yeah. Learning and development.
L&D.
Yeah, but the strategy team, there's people doing some of this work. And so don't see it as a bright, shiny object. Find ways to implement it. There was I think a question that came in before the session that I just wanted to make sure we touch on, which is, look, I know futurists in the past, probably were really successful because, before there was the internet, before there was all this change, they could sort of, gaze and tell people what's going to happen at a macro level. How are futurists still creating value with so much volatile change? And it's never been more relevant, never been more necessary, because remember, futurists aren't trying to predict what's going to happen, but rather empower us to understand what's happening right now and the change that's in front of us, and identify what future we want to create and inform decision making based off of that, and avoid the futures we want to avoid. So it's never been more relevant. The more volatility, the more you need a futurist mindset and foresight capabilities.
I love it. Well, I know we're getting close here, and I know there's a couple other questions that are asking about some different opportunities for learning that may not be, that might not be as expensive. So we can definitely send links also to Frank and Yvette have an amazing podcast that you can listen to, have all sorts of tools. We have a primer that we'll be sending out that is really, it gives a great overview of these types of tools as well that you can just use as a standalone thing. So we'll send a follow-up of some different types of things. And then again, we're all about, like, as Jenny and I, and more of this collaborative approach to different types of things. We will share ideas, resources, things that come our way, different books that really inspire us. every single time that we have something new, if you're interested, just let us know, and then we'll just keep sending different resources.
And if anybody would like to schedule, 30 minutes with Frank or myself or someone on our team to learn more about foresight, and we do those coaching calls all the time. And so we're happy to share with you more about the field. There's an association of professional futurists, there's certification, and yes, there's tons of free and low cost resources in addition to our in-person and online training opportunities if you want to build this muscle.
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Frank and Yvette. Thank you guys for being on this call. Like you said, we've got so many amazing things, and there are so many free resources out there that's on here. So we will send an email out afterwards to everybody. But please reach out, ask questions. Let's please continue the conversation. This is what we love doing, and we want to be able to bring more people together in cross collaboration of what this is, and having people from different worlds is like the best thing that could ever happen here. So,
and you all are the ones. A lot of you have asked, what is the future of X or Y? You all are on the front lines of creating those futures.
Yeah, let's not wait for other people to do it. We literally have the ability. That's the thing.
You all can do it.
You are the future.
We can make some massive, massive changes with the people that are in this room together.
Absolutely.
If we can't do it, then we got bigger issues, but I have faith that we can.
Yes.
Any last minute type of questions, if anyone wants to stay on and ask, please.
Say, Operation Take Over the World. We're all in. World domination, and like for the positive good of change. We're all in for it. Housen's in. He's going to help be a leader with us.
Yes. There's just so many. I know.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Again, as Jenny said, we could stay on and answer any last minute questions, but you guys go enjoy your week, and thanks for being awesome. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.